The gala hall was at its peak. 800 guests, amber light, the hum of glassware. Lena Harmon stood near the center of the room, champagne in one hand. Someone calls security. That man doesn't have a guest badge. Stellan Kor stood beside a display case in work flannel, a clipboard in one hand, a technician's badge in dark blue clipped to his chest. He set the pen down and looked at her. He did not explain. He did not step back. He said nothing at all. Two security officers moved toward him from opposite sides. Across the floor, an older man in a charcoal suit set down his glass. If you're enjoying the story so far, hit like and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. 6 hours earlier, in a small office above a marine supply store on Compromise Street, Stellan Kor was finishing the first half of a valuation file. The sign on his door read Kor Marine Assessments, LLC. The lights were fluorescent. The coffee on his desk had gone cold an hour before. He worked the way a man works when he no longer expects anyone to interrupt him. He had been a marine insurance surveyor for almost 3 years. Before that, 14 years in the Navy. Before that, a different version of himself he did not think about often. The work suited him because it was solitary, technical, and forgiving of the school calendar. When Dex's teacher called at 10 in the morning, he could be at the school by 10:30. That was the whole reason for the company. He had registered the LLC in the spring of 2020, the same month Dex started kindergarten, and he had not regretted a single line of the paperwork. His wife Ruth had died in April of 2019, a truck on the wrong side of Route 50, the state trooper at the door at 2 in the morning. Dex had been 4 years old. He had asked when Mom would come home, and Stellan had not known how to answer, and he had simply held the boy until the boy fell asleep against his chest on the kitchen floor. He had put in his resignation 7 months later, after he had stopped pretending the deployments would not break what was left. At 3 in the afternoon, his phone buzzed. The sitter was sick. The gala began at 7. He needed to be inside the museum by 5, working before guests started arriving. There was no backup plan that fit the timing, and the calendar on his wall did not pretend otherwise. He picked Dex up from school at 3:30 and explained on the drive. Dex listened, considered, and then reached into his backpack for the book on Chesapeake naval history he had been reading all week. The boy was 9. He had inherited his mother's quiet and his father's patience, and he understood what his father's work required of him. He did not complain about it. He had never, in 5 years of single parenting, complained about it once. They crossed the bridge into Annapolis at 4:40. Stellan watched the harbor below, scanning the boats out of habit. He could still name them by class and year. The Navy had not left him. He had simply put down the uniform and kept walking, and the muscle memory had not gone with the uniform. A Coast Guard cutter was tied up at the 3rd pier, and he registered the hull number the way another man might register the make of a passing car. At 5:05 they entered the museum through the contractor door. Stellan signed Dex into the children's exhibit hall. A docent named Margaret had been working that wing for 11 years and knew the boy by name from previous visits. She would be on duty until 9. "Stay where she can see you," Stellan said. "I know, Dad." He started his rounds at the main hall. By 6:50, when the first gala guests began entering through the east doors, Stellan was bent over the 8th display case, measuring the corner of a brass sextant against the catalog photograph. He did not look up. He had 2 more cases to clear before he could move to the next wing. He did not see Lena Harmon enter the room. He did not see her notice him. That same day had begun for Lena Harmon at 6:30 in the morning. She had been at her desk in the Foundation's second-floor offices before the cleaners finished the lobby. She kept a list of every variable for the gala on the wall behind her chair. 800 guests, 4 catering teams, a printed seating chart she had redrawn twice, 3 speakers, 2 security supervisors, the harbor weather forecast for the evening. She had checked them all by 7. The only sound in the office had been the soft tick of the radiator and the distant horn of an early ferry. Lena was 36. She had been executive director of the Harmon Maritime Foundation for 4 years. Before that, 6 years working for her father, learning the organization from the inside. When he died in late 2020, she had inherited what looked like a healthy institution. Within 6 weeks, she had found the hidden debt from a failed traveling exhibit and the lease obligations he had signed without telling the board. The foundation had nearly closed in the spring of 2021. She had spent the 3 years since pulling it back to dry land, dollar by dollar. She did not inherit power. She fought for it. She was not in the habit of letting variables move on their own. At 8 in the morning, Warren Lund came in. He was the chairman of the board, 62 years old, comfortable in the building in a way that came from believing he belonged in it. He poured himself coffee from her pot without asking, and stood at the window for a moment before he turned around. "How are we on the insurance assessment?" he asked. "On schedule. Good. We'll want to discuss the scope before the final report goes out." She nodded without looking up. The word scope did not register as unusual. It would, later. At 4 in the afternoon she walked the building. She passed the main hall and saw a man kneeling beside a display case, clipboard open, dark blue badge clipped to his shirt. A contractor. She did not approach. At 7 the gala began. At 7:15, a junior staffer found her at the bar and spoke into her ear. There was a man in the main hall without a guest badge. She walked over. She saw him. The blue badge was clear against the white of his shirt, not the gold of the gala lanyards on every other guest. In her mind, the calculation was already done. Someone call security. That man doesn't have a guest badge. What she did not see, what she could not have seen, was the older man across the room who had also just noticed. Across the floor, Admiral Roy Cassin, United States Navy, retired, set down his glass. He had served 3 years closely with the man at the display case. He recognized the set of the shoulders before he recognized the face. He did not move quickly. He moved the way a man moves when he has already decided what he is going to do. He crossed the room between the tables. Guests with raised glasses paused mid-sentence as he passed. Someone at table 14 recognized him and half rose, then sat back down without finishing the gesture. He did not acknowledge any of them. He stopped 3 paces in front of Stellan Kor, brought his heels together, and saluted. Crisp, exact, no words first. Stellan returned it. The motion was older than thought. 14 years had not unbuilt it. 5 years out of uniform had not unbuilt it. Admiral, Commander. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the music, which was still playing. Admiral Cassin turned to face the rest of the hall. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "This man is here to do his work. I suggest we let him." Then he looked back at Stellan and said, simply, "Carry on." He walked back to his place at the side of the room, lifted his glass, and resumed his evening as if nothing had happened. The music kept playing. The conversations resumed almost. Forks moved again, but the angles of attention in the room had shifted, and the angles did not shift back. Lena was still holding her champagne. The security officers had stopped 2 paces from Stellan, and were now watching her, waiting for an instruction that no longer made sense. She lowered her hand and gave a small nod that meant, "Stand down." They stood down. One of them, a younger man named Carlos who had worked her events for the last 2 years, gave her a brief, careful look as he turned and walked back to his post. She crossed to the corner of the hall where Petra Johansson was waiting for her. Petra had been operations manager for 9 years and had seen Lena work through worse moments than this. She did not ask questions. She handed over a tablet without being asked. "Pull up the Core Marine contract." Petra pulled it up. Lena read the contract she had signed 3 weeks before. Her own initials in the lower right corner of page 11. The company name across the header. Stellan Kor, Principal. The valuation scope, in detail, line by line. 3 weeks ago she had spent 40 minutes on this document. She had not thought about it since. "Why didn't I meet him?" she asked. "You don't usually meet the assessors," Petra said. "I handle that side." "Why didn't you flag the Whitmore situation last April?" Petra was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant the answer had been waiting. "He flagged it. We were underinsured by $2 million on the Whitmore collection. He caught the error in the catalog metadata. I handled it internally." "At whose direction?" Petra met her eye. "Warren told me not to make it an issue." Lena returned the tablet without answering. She looked at it for a beat longer than she needed to before she set it down on the bar. Across the room, Warren Lund was making his way toward her with a small, fixed smile and a fresh glass in his hand. He arrived at her elbow and lowered his voice the way a man does when he wants to be seen showing concern. "These things happen at events," he said. "Don't let it pull you out of the evening." She looked at him for 1 second longer than was polite. Then she turned and walked away. Stellan, for his part, had returned to the display case. He had picked up his pen. He was making a small notation in the corner of his clipboard with the same steadiness as if the last 6 minutes had not occurred. He did not look across the room for confirmation. He did not look at the Admiral. He did not look at Lena. It was the indifference that struck her, more than the salute had. A man who had been publicly accused of trespass, publicly defended by a flag officer, and was now alone with his work as though both halves of the evening were equally unworthy of his attention. She stood watching him from 5 paces away. She wanted to approach him. She did not know what the first sentence would be. She moved toward the VIP corner instead, because that was what the evening required. A waiter passed her with a tray. The harbor light through the tall windows had gone fully blue. Somewhere on the far side of the hall, the string quartet she had hired 4 months in advance played a piece she had chosen herself and could not now name. She smiled at a donor who said something to her. She did not hear what he said. At 8 o'clock she walked the perimeter of the museum, as she always did during the second hour of an event. She did this to settle herself more than to inspect anything. The building was her territory, and she calmed when she touched its edges. The children's exhibit hall was quieter than usual. The school groups were long gone, and the gala children's program had not started yet. A single boy was sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the large model of the USS Constellation, reading the placard at the base. Lena slowed. He was reading the way a child reads when he actually wants to know, finger tracking the line, lips moving on the harder words. She approached and sat down on the bench 3 feet behind him, so as not to startle him. "Are you reading the whole thing?" she asked. He turned. He was 9, maybe 10. Brown hair, serious eyes. "It says she had 44 guns, he said. "Is that true?" 44 when she was first commissioned. "They changed it later." "Why?" "Bigger guns. Heavier. They took some off so the deck wouldn't crack under the recoil." The boy nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Do you work here?" he asked. "I run the museum." He considered that. "Which part of the ship is your favorite?" She thought about it. She gave him a real answer. "The keel. Everything rests on it and nobody ever sees it." He nodded again, more slowly this time. "My dad knows a lot about ships. He was in the Navy." She did not move. She did not ask any of the questions that rose into her throat at once. She let the sentence sit where the boy had set it down. "What's your name?" she asked instead. "Dex Core." She heard the last name. She did not let it show in her face. "Mine's Lena." "That's a pretty name." "Thank you, Dex." A shape appeared at the doorway behind her. She knew without turning who it would be. She turned anyway. Stellan was standing in the threshold, jacket folded over one arm, the clipboard tucked under the other. He had seen her sitting on the bench at the boy's eye level. He had stopped. For a long second he did not move. She did not move either. Then he gave Dex a small nod, the kind of nod that meant "I'll come back," and stepped out of view down the hallway. Lena stayed where she was. "He works late sometimes," Dex said. "But he always comes for me." "I'm sure he does." She asked him a few more questions: what school he went to, what other ships he liked, whether he had ever been on the harbor in winter. He answered them all, with the careful attention of a child who took conversation seriously. He told her his favorite was the brig, because it was small and could outrun bigger ships in shallow water. She got up after a few more minutes. She told Dex she would send Margaret the docent to bring him a juice, and she did. As she walked back toward the main hall, she did the arithmetic in her head. 3 weeks ago she had signed a contract with a man she had never met, and 4 hours ago she had ordered him removed from her building, and 20 minutes ago his 9-year-old son had told her in plain words who his father had been. At 9 the gala had thinned. The early speeches were done. The serious donors were drifting toward Coates. Warren Lund waited until Stellan was alone at the last display case in the main hall, and walked over without a glass in his hand. "Mr. Core." His voice was friendly. "I don't believe we've had the chance." Stellan straightened. "Mr. Lund, I wanted to introduce myself before the report goes to print. I think we'd benefit from a conversation about scope. The board has some priorities for the next fiscal year that may inform the valuations in certain categories." "Which categories specifically?" Warren smiled. "We can address that through the legal channel. I just wanted you to know the conversation is coming." "Send it in writing?" "Of course." "From which counsel?" Warren's smile thinned by 0.5 millimeter. "You'll receive the correspondence in due course." Stellan capped his pen. He did not look at Warren again. He gathered his clipboard, his measure, and his small leather case of cataloging tools, and he packed them in the order he always packed them, clipboard last, on top, because that was the order in which he would unpack them the next morning. He nodded once, and walked past Warren toward the corridor that led to the children's exhibit. Warren stood for a moment alone at the case. He glanced down at the display, at the sextant Stellan had been measuring. He had expected the conversation to go differently. Most conversations he started went differently. Then he turned and walked back toward Lena, who was at the far end of the room shaking hands with a departing donor. He arrived at her side with the easy smile back in place. "Your surveyor seems thorough." "He is. Let's hope the report reflects the Foundation's best interests." She held his eye for a count of 3. "It will reflect what it finds." He did not answer that. He moved on, with a small flick of his hand that suggested the conversation had been pleasant. Lena watched him go and noticed for the first time the small mannerism, the flick of dismissal that she had been seeing for 2 years and not naming. Stellan reached the children's exhibit. Dex was reading still, the same placard. He looked up and stood without being asked, slipping the book into his backpack. "She knew about the Chesapeake Fleet," he said in the hallway. "Like, actually knew." "Who?" "The lady who runs the museum." Stellan kept walking. His hand was at the boy's shoulder. He did not ask anything else. He did not need to ask anything else. He had seen her at the doorway. He had seen the way she had sat with the boy. There was nothing to add to that. At the door to the parking lot he paused, and for 1 second he looked back down the corridor toward the lights of the main hall. The corridor was empty. The string quartet was still playing. Then he opened the door, and they stepped out into the cold November air, and he buckled Dex into the passenger seat and drove home along the harbor road with the boy asleep against the window before they had reached the bridge. The truck radio was tuned to a public station that played quiet jazz at this hour. Stellan kept the volume low. He drove the long way around because the long way let Dex finish his sleep. That night, Petra Johansson did not go home. She sat in her office on the 2nd floor, with the lights low and a folder on the desk in front of her. The folder had been in the bottom drawer of her file cabinet for 2 months. She had not opened it in 6 weeks. She opened it now. Inside were the documents she had been gathering since September. A printed map of a waterfront development plan, pulled from the public website of a real estate firm called Coastland Atlantic Partners. The proposed footprint of the development overlapped, almost exactly, with the parcel currently occupied by the Harmon Maritime Museum. A meeting note from the September board session, with a single line redacted, which Petra had photographed before the redaction was applied. An internal email of Warren's, forwarded to her by a junior accountant who had since left the Foundation, which read, "The assessment must not exceed 4.2 million total, or the acquisition becomes unviable." She had been afraid. She had been afraid that nothing she did with the folder would matter. She had been afraid that something would happen to her position if she handed it up the chain. She had been more afraid, in truth, of being wrong, because 9 years of operations work had taught her that being right and being right at the right moment were 2 different things. The salute had changed her arithmetic. She had stood in the hall and watched an admiral cross a room to honor a man no one in the building had recognized. She had stood 10 feet from Lena Harmon and watched her execute the cleanest, fastest course correction Petra had ever seen, in front of 800 people, without losing a step. There were 2 people in that building tonight willing to do the right thing when no one was looking. She was going to be the 3rd. She also had 1 more document, which she had received that evening, forwarded to her in her capacity as contracts officer, an email from a law firm, Brennan, Lund, and Hayes, to Stellan Core, suggesting that he revise his methodology for certain categories. No personal signature. Pure legal language. Brennan, Lund, and Hayes. Warren's firm. His own brother was the senior partner. Petra had known that for 2 years. She had never had occasion to write the connection down on a page before tonight. She closed the folder. She wrote a note on a single sheet of paper and clipped it to the top. "I should have given you this 2 months ago. P." She thought about leaving it at that. She thought about writing something more, an explanation, a defense of the delay. She did not. The note was true as it stood, and Lena Harmon was the kind of person who would not require more than a true sentence. Petra had worked for her long enough to know what she did with explanations. She set them aside and went to the next thing. At 6:45 the next morning, before Lena's assistant arrived, Petra placed the folder on Lena's desk, walked downstairs, signed out of the building, and went home to sleep for the first time in 2 months. Lena arrived at 7. She saw the folder. She read the note. She sat down and read every page. When she was finished, she closed the cover and sat with her hands flat on the desk for a full minute before she picked up the phone. By 8:30, she had called Marcus Pell, the Foundation's outside counsel, and left a message that he was to call her back before 9. By 8:45, she had asked Petra to bring her the full set of board financial records for the prior 18 months. By 9, she had a second cup of coffee on her desk that she did not drink. At 9:15, her inbox refreshed, and a message appeared from Stellan Kaur. There was no body text, only a forwarded email and a single line at the top. "You should see this." She opened the forward. She read it. She set the coffee down. The language matched the documents in the folder. It matched Warren's voice. It matched the firm name. It was the last piece. She did not need a lawyer to tell her that. She called the lawyer anyway, because she would do this correctly. At 10, she walked downstairs and into the main hall. Stellan was already there, gloved hands on a display case, returning to the morning of an ordinary contract day. She came to stand a respectful distance from him, beside the case. "Thank you for forwarding that." He looked up. "It wasn't mine to keep." No, it wasn't. She did not move on right away. He did not return to the case right away. "The compass on the end," he said. 1887, per your records. "That's correct. The case style is 1860s. Whoever cataloged it didn't open the back plate." He looked at the compass, then at him. "I'll have it pulled for verification." "Good." He resumed work. She stayed beside the case a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and then walked back the way she had come. Slowly, the corridor light coming through the windows at angles she had walked under 1,000 times without noticing. She spent the rest of the morning with Marcus Pell on a secure line. By noon, they had built a presentation order for the board. By 1, she had asked Margaret Holcomb, the vice chair, to come into the office for a private conversation. Margaret arrived at 2 and left at 3:30. When she left, she looked older than she had when she had arrived. The foundation was the work of her late friend, and she had voted for Warren Lund 3 times as chairman. That night, Lena stayed late. She sat in her office with the door closed and the harbor going dark through the window. She thought about the man at the case with his sleeves rolled, his hands steady, his attention complete. She thought about how easily her own voice had said someone call security. She thought about what it must have cost him not to answer her in the hall, and what it cost a man, over years, to make not answering a discipline rather than a wound. She thought about Ruth Kaur, whom she had never met and would never meet, and about a 4-year-old boy on a kitchen floor. She thought about the salute, about the precision of it, about a flag officer crossing a room to make a point not to her but to the room, and how the point had been the simplest one available, that this man belonged in the building exactly the way he was already standing in it. She opened her email. She typed for 2 minutes and deleted what she had written. She typed again, shorter. "Mr. Kaur, the assessment will continue as contracted. No adjustments to scope or methodology. Thank you for your work. L. Harmon." She sent it. She turned off the desk lamp. She sat in the dark for another minute before she went home. The emergency board meeting was called for Wednesday at 10. Warren Lund arrived, believing it was a routine financial review. He was wrong. Lena did not raise her voice once. She presented the folder Petra had given her, and the email Stellan had forwarded, and the 18 months of financial records, and the public map of the Coastland Atlantic Development Plan, and the records of the Brennan, Lund, and Hayes engagement letters Warren had signed without disclosing his brother's role. She arranged the documents in sequence on the long oak table, the way a surveyor would arrange evidence on a coastline east to west, in the order the tide would take them. Warren was composed through the first 3 items. He stopped being composed when the development map was projected onto the screen, and the overlap with the museum parcel showed in red. The red was not subtle. It covered 92% of the existing footprint. He started to speak twice and stopped both times. He set his pen down on the legal pad in front of him, and then picked it up again and then set it down. The motion was made by Margaret Holcomb. She did not look at Warren when she made the motion. She looked at the table. The motion was to remove Warren Lund from the chairmanship effective immediately, and to refer the matter to outside counsel for further review. The vote was 7-2. The 2 no votes were Warren himself and a board member named Lawrence Kane, who had been Warren's law school roommate and had served on the board at Warren's invitation. Lawrence did not look at anyone when he cast his vote. He did not look at anyone when the meeting adjourned. He left through the side door. Admiral Casson attended the meeting in his honorary capacity. By bylaw, he did not vote. He did not speak. He sat upright at the end of the table and watched each member directly when their turn came to raise their hand. 2 members hesitated. Both of them voted yes. After the room cleared, Lena stood with the Admiral by the windows that overlooked the harbor. The midday light was on the water. A fishing boat was coming in below them. Neither of them said anything for nearly half a minute. "How long have you known him?" she asked finally. 14 years, Casson said. 3 of them closely. I was the one who recommended his transfer to the unit he ended up commanding. I'm the reason he was in Norfolk the year his son was born, and not somewhere he couldn't have come home from. He never said anything. He wouldn't. That's why I did. She nodded. Is he doing well? The Admiral asked. I think so. I'm still learning what that looks like for him. He smiled, almost. That sounds about right. Take your time with it. He'll let you, if you do. At her desk that afternoon, she wrote a short email. Mr. Core, the board situation has been resolved. The assessment may continue without interference. L. Harmon. The reply came 40 minutes later. He had typed it, deleted it once, and typed it again. She could not have known that, but the wording showed it. Thank you, Ms. Harmon. 3 weeks to completion. S. Core. It was the first time he had signed only his initials. For the 3 weeks that followed, Stellan came to the museum on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Nothing about his work changed, but when he came in through the contractor door, the receptionist greeted him by name, and no one asked to see his badge twice. The morning custodian, an older man named Walter, began leaving the lights on in the main hall for him before he arrived. The cafe across the street learned how he took his coffee black, no sugar, and had it ready when he stopped in at 8:15 on a Tuesday. Lena did not schedule meetings with him. She did not need to. Her afternoon walkthroughs of the main hall began, without comment, to align with the hours he worked. They spoke about brass fittings and the difference between Chesapeake-built and New England-built schooner hulls. They spoke about the compass, which had come back from verification dated to 1863, exactly as he had said. They did not speak about the gala. They did not speak about Warren. They did not speak about the salute. One Thursday, she brought 2 cups of coffee from the cafe across the street. She set one down beside his case without saying anything and kept walking. She did not look back. She heard, 10 paces later, the small sound of a paper cup being lifted from a wooden bench, and the smaller sound of him taking the first sip. On a Tuesday, she found him in the storage corridor behind the main hall, kneeling beside a crate that had been wrongly labeled since the 80s. He looked up when she came in. She did not say anything. She handed him a flashlight from her pocket because the corridor bulb had gone out the week before. He took it without comment and went back to the crate. She stayed long enough to hold the light at the angle he needed, and then handed it off to him and went back upstairs. On the second Saturday, Dex came with his father. There was a guest pass waiting at the front desk in an envelope, with his full name printed on it in the formal Foundation typeface. She put my whole name, he said. She does things properly. Lena walked him through the entire collection. Stellan came behind, the clipboard tucked under one arm, the boy's coat folded over the other. He was not invited and he was not turned away. They moved through the rooms in a comfortable, mostly quiet line, the boy asking a question every few minutes. Lena answering, Stellan listening from a half-pace back. At one point, Dex stopped to look at a small oil portrait of a 19th-century captain and stood in front of it for almost a minute. Lena waited. Stellan waited. The boy moved on when he was ready. At one of the cases, Dex pointed at a curved wooden tool and asked what it was. Lena did not know. She turned and looked at Stellan. He answered. She wrote it down on the small pad she had started carrying for these walks. She did not realize, until she had finished writing, that she had begun carrying a pad for these walks. When they reached the children's exhibit, she stopped at the model of the constellation. Dex looked at her, and she looked at him, and they both smiled without explaining anything to Stellan, who watched the exchange and did not ask. On the last day of the contract, Stellan signed the final report and laid the envelope on Lena's desk. The job was finished. Every formal reason for him to be in the building had now ended. He put on his coat and walked toward the lobby. Lena had been in her office. She came out into the hallway and stopped a few paces from him. The afternoon light from the lobby windows was behind her, and the museum's display lights were warm along the walls. Outside, the harbor wind was up. A flag on the pole across the plaza was snapping at the line. Somewhere in the building a heater clicked on. The sound of an old institution, settling into its own afternoon. He set the toolbox down by the front desk. He had carried it in and out of the building 37 times across the contract. He would not be carrying it in again. It's a strong collection, he said. Worth protecting, I know. I read every page. Good. He turned toward the door. Mr. Core. He looked back. She stood with the envelope held loosely at her side. She did not move closer. I'm sorry. For the first night, he held her eyes for a long moment. He did not soften. You did your job. Not well enough. No. Not that night. It was not bitter. It was not generous. It was the truth, said out loud and received without flinching, and they both felt the small weight of it settle between them. A pause. The lobby clock ticked once. Dex wants to come back, he said. There's a winter exhibit opening in December. I'll put his name on the list. Just his? She looked at him fully then. The light caught the edge of her jaw. No, both names. He held her gaze for a moment that was not long by the clock and not short by anything else. He nodded once. He pulled the door open. The November wind came in for a second, and then the door closed behind him. He stood in the lobby and watched through the glass as he walked toward his truck. He did not look back, but the way he carried himself across the lot was the carriage of a man who knew December was not far away. She turned and walked the corridor toward the main hall. She stopped at the case that held the 1863 compass. The new placard had been printed earlier that week, with the corrected date and a small acknowledgement line at the bottom that read, "With thanks to S. Core Marine Assessments." She put her hand on the glass for a moment and let it rest there. The brass beneath the glass caught the warm light from above. The needle had not moved in 163 years, and still pointed exactly where it should. Outside, the wind kept moving. Inside, the lights kept burning at their usual angles, and the building she had spent 4 years saving stood around her in the quiet of a Thursday afternoon. Every case in order, every record corrected, every name finally entered the way it should have been from the start. Neither of them had been looking. They had simply been standing in the same building, doing separate work until the work ran out, and there was nothing left between them but the truth of what they had each seen.